Thank you, Speaker, and I rise to support this condolence motion, and in doing so recognise all those who lost their lives in this period across the country, but particularly the three residents from my own electorate in Dave Morosi, Fred Becker and Mick Roberts. I knew each of these gentlemen to varying degrees, it's probably fair to say, not all well, but certainly knew them all. And I'd like to make a few comments about each. Mick Roberts is a bit of a Buchan legend, and I did say Buchan, legend, and he had a very, very dry sense of humour and was very, very well respected in his community. I was in Buchan just a couple of days after that town was ravaged by fire, and I had been to a community meeting, and I was sitting down having a beer in the bar, and I was having a chat to a bloke called Craig Woodgate, and after about 10 minutes of having a yarn, it was Craig who opened up and told me that he'd actually found Mick after the event, and left me quite speechless for a while. You're sitting there with the rawness of talking to this man who had just found one of his great mates after this incident. And it certainly hits home. Mick will be remembered obviously as a bit of the larrikin that he was. He liked to laugh, but he was as tough as nails, and he never really whinged or complained about anything that was irrelevant. He was a man's man, and he was a salt of the earth type of bloke. Fred Becker, as leader of the Nationals pointed out, was a third generation timber worker. And it's probably fair to say that been on the receiving end of a few bursts from Fred and his brother Ron over the years on various issues, but a great fella. And in flying into Mallacoota last week and just walking around that community, I was taken aback to a degree about the amount of different people who mentioned to me what a loss he will be to that community. He was held in very, very high regard in the Far East, and the amount of people that speak fondly of Fred is, I think, testament to how he was, I guess, regarded in such an important part of that region. From a personal perspective, the loss of Dave Morosi was probably the one that hit home the hardest. I was brought up and raised in a little place called Meetung, and Speaker, when you live in Meetung, you play football for Swan Reach. And as a young bloke, or Swanee as it's probably better known, as a young bloke being raised, I invariably played footy for Swanee. And every young player wants to be the flashy full forward who takes a mark and kicks a goal. And when I rocked up there back in the day, a fair while ago now, about 35 years ago or a bit longer, Dave Morosi was the full forward for Swan Reach. So I thought Dave was pretty good, because I wanted to be a bit like Dave, taking those marks and kicking those goals. In later years, when I got into coaching, Dave took up umpiring, and it's probably fair to say, Judy, that we did have a few chats to differing degrees on the field at different times, but always had an enormous amount of respect for Dave. He loved his sport, he loved the outdoors, he loved his family, and he will just simply be remembered. The best way to describe Dave is quite simply as a good bloke. And all these three men will be greatly missed by the East Gippsland community. I want to also thank all those, as other speakers have done, thank those who assisted in both the firefight and the clean-up. The firefighters from the CFA and the various government agencies, the defence personnel, and a special thanks to our timber industry in East Gippsland. Yeah. Now, these timber workers are such an important part of our community. When we have a situation like we had, they're at the forefront cutting fire breaks. They're at the knife's edge of these disasters. And then when it had passed, they were the guys who were pushing the trees off the roads to get our roads open. And I certainly thank them enormously for the great work that they did in our community. The generosity, both local and statewide, has been absolutely incredible. We ended up having to turn around trucks that were coming into town with clothes, with food items and the like. The examples of generosity are probably too great to mention, but just a couple very quick ones. We had people dropping into the relief centre offering the keys to their homes for people who'd lost their own places to stay. We had a gentleman dropped off the keys to a new car just to gift to someone who had lost their car. We had a stage where we had to get nappies into a remote community by chopper. And as we're feverishly running around the supermarket getting all these nappies that we can get, a couple from Melbourne who were on their way home because they had to evacuate just ran their credit card through and paid the $890 bill and said, "That's our contribution," and then walked out the door. Didn't even know their names. We had truck drivers running into town who are doing it very tough themselves on the back of drought and hardship, who just felt the need that they had to contribute, and talking to those people is very humbling. I want to thank the MPs on all sides of the chamber here for the calls, the support and the visits of assistance. I want to thank Ben Foster from the Premier's office, who was pretty much on fast dial nearly every day, and we managed to sort quite a few things out, which was good, and we need a bipartisan support when these sorts of things occur. While all the help and support was fantastic, we also need to look at how we can do things better and how we can alleviate problems in the future. And there are two issues that stand out that our Nationals leader touched on, and I want to just touch on them briefly. It's unacceptable to have the Princes Highway closed for a month. We just cannot have that. It's the second time it's happened in recent years. It was costing some of our freight companies $100,000 a week. It isolated communities that didn't need to be isolated for that long. And as a parliament, all of us, I think we need to have a rational, common sense approach to roadside clearing that avoids that occurring again in the future. In relation to fuel loads in the bush, and I know that it's been a contentious issue for quite some time, and there are differing points of view on this. We need to do better. We need to do better. There is a map in my office downstairs now that shows the effectiveness of where we did fuel reduction burns last year. The fire did not burn through those areas. It touched into some, but it did not burn through any of those areas, and it stopped the fire on a large number of fronts. We look at the Tostaree fire in 2014, where that fire that was going to threaten Orbost and knock Orbost over, it hit a fuel reduction burn area right out in the middle of nowhere out the back of Waigara. The combination of it hitting that fuel reduction burn area in the wider bush and the quietness of the night allowed the firefighters to get it under control. So as a parliament, I think, yes, we can look at strategic burning. Absolutely, we need to do more around townships. But we also must do fuel reduction burns in the wider landscape. Every summer, we go in and we put out 300 to 500 lightning strikes, as we need to do to protect towns. We need to do that. But in doing that, we alter the balance of nature, and then we do not restore it at other times of the year. We need to have a think about the way we handle those things, both from an environmental perspective and a community safety perspective. I just want to finish off in my brief amount of time by talking about the way forward. And we've been hit hugely economically. You couldn't have organised the timing to be any worse for our businesses in East Gippsland. For the fires to come on December 29 and run through most of January and have the highway closed all that time has decimated and devastated our business sector, and they need more supports. So whilst the business mentoring is handy, whilst the tax relief is handy, whilst the money to local government to support business with rate subsidies is handy, in this instance it is not going to cut it. We need direct financial supports. And I know the Premier, we had a brief discussion this morning, and I'm also having these discussions with my federal colleagues. If we don't give them direct support, they will close, and those businesses won't be there for when we get back on our feet. So I put that on the record and state that we need to do better in that regard going forward. We have been hit hard. We're on our knees in East Gippsland. I think everyone knows that. But we will get up again, we will punch on again, but we're going to need a little bit of extra help to do it. Thank you.
Hear, hear.